Some brands offer you low finance, or cashback, or servicing.
Renault don't do ors. We do ands. The Renault Kadjar with 1.91% APR and €1,000 cashback and 3 years servicing, saving you thousands. Renault, the brand with the ands. Visit your local Renault dealer. Finance is made under a hire purchase agreement. Terms and conditions apply. Deposit required subject to lending criteria. See Renault.ie.
Blog Talk Radio.
No risk it, no biscuit.
Coming from the Arizona desert, presented by SBNation.com. For Arizona Cardinals fans, by Arizona Cardinals fans, with outsider and insider's perspective, this is Revenge of the Birds. Good evening, Arizona Cardinals fans. This is Revenge of the Birds Radio. I'm your host, Jess Root. And we are here on a Tuesday night. Unfortunately, it is not a couple of days following Cardinals victory. It is a couple of days following not only a loss, but an embarrassing loss and a costly loss at that. And we're going to be talking about that. We will have our regular Tuesday night guest with us, as we will have Ben with us. He's actually on the line. How are you doing tonight, Ben?
Hey, Jess, everybody. I'm doing okay. How are you?
I'm doing great. Glad to have you on. And in a moment, we'll have Seth connected as well. In the meantime, if you would like to call in and talk to us about Arizona Cardinals football, questions about current situation of the Arizona Cardinals, you can call us tonight by dialing 646-478-3787. And we now have Seth on the line. How are you doing tonight, buddy?
Good, Jess. How are you?
Doing all right. So let's go ahead and start off with we actually have a lot to talk about, as there's quite a bit of news, unfortunate news coming out of Cardinals land, out of Arizona. Well, actually, even though the Cardinals are not currently in Arizona, they are spending the week out in Florida. They will be visiting Tampa Bay on Sunday, and so much like they did in 2009, when they chose to stay out east instead of coming home and then traveling back out there, they are staying out in Florida after they got on a plane after they left Louisiana and landed in Florida, and they're holed up in a hotel out there and practicing at one of the facilities out there. Talk about the game a little bit as we get started. The game looks really promising as the Cardinals started off the game, marched down the field, scored a touchdown, and things looked really good. That was all the points they managed to muster. The Saints scored 31 unanswered points. Now, after a final score of 31-7, it looked really lopsided, and I guess in part it was. However, the game was close, really kind of close for most of the game, within a score or two. And even though you look at the statistics thinking the defense didn't play all that particularly well, you never kind of felt, basically the whole game, you never felt that the defense seemed to be the problem. We'll talk a little bit more about that, but going down some of the numbers, the Cardinals only ran 55 offensive plays, which is somewhat reminiscent of the 2012 Arizona Cardinals. The Saints ran 74 plays. They gained a total of 423 yards of offense, while the Cardinals mustered up a measly 247 yards of offense. The Carson Palmer threw 2 interceptions, no touchdowns, only 187 yards passing. The Cardinals managed to run for 86 yards, but only on 16 carries. They only attempted to run the ball 16 times, the most by Rashard Mendenhall with 9 carries. Larry Fitzgerald led the team with 5 receptions, 64 yards, rather ho-hum. And if you look over on the side of the Saints, you will see what the problem was. Jimmy Graham, he was targeted 15 times, 9 receptions, 134 yards with 2 touchdowns. And then on top of that, Darren Sproles, 4 catches for 39 yards, and then 3 carries for 17 yards as well. And Drew Brees looked like Drew Brees. He did get picked off once in the end zone by Tyrann Mathieu. Very, very nice play. But he threw for 3 touchdowns. He had 342 yards passing. Threw the ball 46 times. In fact, really the New Orleans Saints, they basically didn't try to run the ball at all until late in the game. The game plan was to pass the ball. End of the story is 31-7 Cardinals lose. They fall to 1-2 in the season. And yet, as demoralizing as it feels and everything that happened, because there were some key injuries, and we're going to have to get into that. We lost Lorenzo Alexander for the season. We lost Sam Achu for the season. We lost Rashad Johnson with one of his strange injuries where inexplicably he lost his fingertip on a punt play. He tweeted out some kind of gruesome pictures later on. And then the latest news that came out today is another injury coming out of the game was that of rookie linebacker Alex Okafor, who got his first game experience in the regular season, only to now have his season end with a torn biceps. But what we're going to talk about, let's get into the game a little bit. And, well, let's just go start. Just basically, what went wrong? What went wrong for this game for the Cardinals? We'll start with you. Ben, tonight. What went wrong on Sunday?
Mama said there'd be days like this, right? What went wrong other than everything? The problem on offense, I think, is that the Saints were just able to create too much pressure, and it was just with a 4-man rush. I thought during the game that they were blitzing a lot because, I think there were more Saints players in the pocket than they were able to spend more time in there than Carson Palmer was. But if they weren't really blitzing that much, actually, it was just 4 guys getting the job done. They played Curtis Lofton close to the line of scrimmage pretty often. I think he was spying on our backs or whatever they had him doing. But, yeah, it was pretty much just 4 guys. And the bottom line there is that it's just tough to beat a defense that can get to your QB with only 4. It leaves a lot of bodies in coverage. There's a lot of obstacles. And if your quarterback isn't making plays for whatever reason, you can say maybe it was the lack of protection, maybe he was just having a bad hair day, whatever it was. In that case, you're going to get 7 points. You're going to get 50% completion percentage, and that was a big part of the problem. The defense held up okay, even with the missed tackles, even with Jimmy Graham running wild. They pretty much fought the good fight for most of the game, I think, but the offense just couldn't keep them in it, and we've all heard that story before, so I'm just going to stop there.
So, your turn, Seth. What is it that, just from your eyes, what went wrong Sunday afternoon?
Just more of issues with the offense not getting going. There's clearly timing issues. There's clearly still filling out that needs to be done, and it's just not close to where you want it to be yet. And at this point, I preached personally, and it's hard sometimes to do this, but I preached personally that you needed patience. And and even I'm at the point where we're 3 games in. They've had probably cumulative 5 games worth of snaps together, including the preseason, and there's still a lot of timing issues going on, and that for me is hard to see offensively, especially with all of the veteran presence that they have. Especially in the passing game. I don't know if it's a combination of Palmer is just kind of turning into Kevin Cobb in the pocket, and so it's making issues with finding receivers. And it all stems from the offensive line, yes, but you still have to make plays when you have the opportunity, and they're missing a lot of open plays right now. And I think that's where kind of everything went wrong, is that they can't get into any rhythm offensively.
And what I saw, obviously, offense is kind of the theme going on the offense was more or less the theme on Sunday when they played so poorly. But yeah, you mentioned Carson Palmer looking kind of like Kevin Cobb, and he did with the pressure that he was feeling because he got hit a lot, he got hurried a lot. He was starting to shy away from pressure, or get those skittish, happy feet that everyone criticized Kevin Kolb for. And so he had Kevin Kolb-like behavior out in the field. His numbers look like John Skelton, 50% of his passes. He's got 180 yards. He's got a couple of interceptions. So it's very John Skelton and Ryan Lindley looking. And he was, with the exception of the one play in the middle of the field later in the game to Larry Fitzgerald, there was really nothing down the field that he was hitting. He was not hitting those passes. They were not on target. And we haven't really seen from Carson Palmer what Steve Keim and Bruce Arians were saying is that, hey, the guy's got the arm. He can still put the ball down the field and put it with accuracy. We haven't seen much of that yet. The other part that was wrong is just, even though they had they had 4 sacks, and I'm going to downplay the 4 sacks a little bit because 3 of them came from Darnell Dockett. And that's great that Darnell Dockett had 3 sacks, but if you look at it, he was playing against an undrafted guy who was the backup to Jari Evans. And so that Darnell Dockett now can beat out that guy. He can outplay that guy. And so we've got some production. Yeah, he got the numbers up there. But even though we're getting the pressure, the pass defense just doesn't look right. I mean, coming after a year after one of the top pass defenses in the NFL, they just look like a defense. Maybe it's philosophically they're going more to be stronger against the run in part, but they just don't look the same. Like you can count on them to get a good defensive stop from a team that passes the ball a lot. One of the things that we saw early, and that happened to be their very successful, their point scoring drive, is that they ran the ball quite successfully. They mixed it in. They had Rashad Mendenhall. They had Alfonso Smith. Smith ran great. He had 3 carries for the game, and then he sort of disappeared the rest of the game. He had the touchdown. He had the big 21-yard run, and then he disappeared inexplicably. What do you guys have to say about the running game? If you look at the numbers, they averaged 5.5 yards a carry. Now, a little bit of that, granted, you got the 21-yard run from Alfonso Smith. You had an 11-yard run by Patrick Peterson on a reverse. You also had a 14-yard run from Andre Ellington. And after that, it was a lot of the shorter things. But in the end, 86 yards, 5.5 yards a carry. Why did they run the ball more? And why did they get rid of it why did they abandon it so early? What do you guys think about kind of getting away from what they were being successful with early on? What do you think, Seth?
Well, I kind of talked about this a lot on Twitter on Sunday, and I just didn't understand what their philosophy was. It was interesting listening to Bruce Arians talk about this post-game, and he said he thought that the game was more out of hand than other people did earlier than what a lot of fans and other I don't even know what analysts thought. And I've found that kind of interesting because I didn't feel like the game was really that out of hand until maybe about halfway through the third quarter, and it still wasn't even that out of hand score-wise. But they stopped running the ball basically after the first series. I think I charted they had 5 or 6 carries on the first series, and they ended up with 11 the rest of the game. So that kind of is a cop-out in my mind. He went away from that balanced attack that they had on that first drive, and what that says to me is that once the play calling script ran out, or when they scripted their first drive, once that ran out, he kind of reverted back to, I'm going to throw the ball down the field and make big plays, and that's what I'm going to do. And against a very active and athletic front four, and against a improved secondary, you can't really do that, especially when it still looks like Larry Fitzgerald is kind of struggling with that hamstring, because we've seen now for 2 weeks that if Larry isn't demanding a double team, the other wide receivers aren't going to be getting open on their own. So it's for me, it was interesting that despite the pass game being not strong at that time, they leaned on it heavily, acting like that was the way to go, and that just seemed weird to me.
Give us your take, Ben. What's your takeaway from the running game or the lack thereof after having the success early in the game?
Well, I'm kind of like Seth. I don't understand it, and I can't explain it, but I can talk about it a little bit. I was happy to see Smith and Ellington. They both looked pretty good. It was fun watching Ellington, the way they were using him. They motioned him out wide a couple of times. They lined him up at fullback, and I think he took at least one end around a little bit later on in the game. That was pretty cool. He has a nice burst. He looked good out there. Smith was able to show off his speed a couple times, which has been nice. He's showed up pretty well all year, but he really hasn't gotten into the open space to really kind of spin the wheels and show us what kind of speed he has. So it was cool seeing him break a couple decent gains off there. But I think I have to think that either Mendenhall himself was a big part of the issue with him being limited in practice and such. His yards per carry on the day were not very good, and I don't know if that was because he was just kind of banged up with his toe or if the Saints were just playing the run that well. I know Arians said that his injury is similar to turf toe, which usually lingers. And then we had Smith and Ellington. I mean, they were pretty involved in the offense from the very get-go, so we can pretty well assume that they expected Mendenhall would be limited in the game. I think it's just that they didn't run it, and I don't know why. They started with that beautiful drive. And then in the second quarter, even as early as the second drive, I think they went into these 4 and 5 wide shotgun sets, and they just never went away from them. I don't know if they were trying to open up the run a little bit more with the pass. I don't really think they were, because you wouldn't line up in all these empty shotgun sets if that's what you're doing. So I don't know. We don't really need 5 backs on the roster if you're only going to run it 15 times a game. I'm just going to point that out.
And well, I'm going to throw this out there, Gabe. Go ahead, Seth. Go ahead.
I was just say, Ben, the reason Mendenhall wasn't impactful is because he's just not that great. So that's part of the reason that it is.
There's negative Seth. There's negative Seth again.
Shots fired.
No, it's just, a lot of people gave me crap for this, but he is Beanie Wells. I mean, he's a lot like Beanie Wells. He's going to get a lot of 2-yard, 1-yard, no yards, and then he's going to break a 8-yard, and you're like, okay, here it comes, and then you get a lot of 2-3-yard carries, and then you'll get a 10-yard carry, and you're like, oh, okay, it's about to start again, and that's just how he's always ran the football. It's not a bad thing. It's just that's who he is. And, you can tell that his legs are kind of betraying him at only 24 or 25, however old he is. And so it's an issue, and he doesn't have, the burst that these young guys have. And Jess, you talked about this a little bit in the preseason, but Alfonso's just running much harder than he ever has before. And so that's, we know he's a 4.3 speed guy, but now he's playing like a 4.3 speed guy when he gets the ball in his hands. So that's, all of a sudden you have 2 much more quick backs in Ellington and Alfonso. And so I think, even if you're splitting carries between the two of them and still giving Mendenhall 15 carries a game to be kind of your grinder, you want to get to the 30 carry range, and if that's, that needs to be the goal. And when you're only getting 16 total carries a game, and one of those is on an in around to Patrick Peterson, I don't think you're utilizing one of your strengths very well.
Well, it's really a couple of things that's kind of developing as we see the year go through, is that you can tell that Bruce Arians is really starting to love himself some Andre Ellington. They're finding ways to put him out in the field. I counted 11 times in which they ran plays with 2-back formations, something that isn't very Bruce Arians-like. And they've used Ellington. There was 3 or 4 plays when he was used as a blocker, when he was lead blocking like a fullback, and Arians isn't very big on fullbacks, but I think when you get a guy like Ellington who's big enough to throw his body around and make a block, who can catch the ball and who can run, that's better than a fullback that they have. Another thing, and I'm going to throw this out here again, and some people are going to get upset about it, is guess who Bruce Arians is? He's Ken Wisenhunt, only older and a better quote. The same things Bruce Arians has done the first few games. If we look, he started off running the ball well, scripted play, but then what happened? He bailed on the running game, and he talked about how the game we got away early He started passing the ball, passing the ball. That's no different than Kenny Wisenhunt, who was here, and people started to hate. Now, again, I never had a problem with Wisenhunt. It was just kind of his quirks. I mean, Andy Reid's a great coach, but what is he terrible? He's terrible at game management at the end of games. As good a coach as he is, he's really terrible at it. But Arians, I want to get this across, despite the words and the quotes and the funny and the way that he talks in the bald head, he's really not much different than Ken Wisenhunt, and I'm seeing that. But yeah, take away from that, the running game, they should have done it. I mean, obviously they should have done it more. In one case, I'm actually very pleased in one thing about the running game based on as opposed to last year. They may not be busting off a lot of big games, but when they do run the ball, they are not getting those 0 and negative plays that they had a season ago. Yes, they're going to have a 1 or 2 yard game, but you see more 2 and 3 yard pickups, even if at the worst. And I'm going to give them credit, the offensive line credit, the running backs credit, because the last 2 years has been, truthfully, years in general, it's been awful the number of 0 gain and negative plays that we've had in the running game over the years. Now, the offense obviously struggled. And again, Cardinals fans, if you want to give us a call and you give us your thoughts, whether it be the offense, we're still talking about the Cardinals-Saints game, and we're going to continue to do so, and the kind of the aftermath and things that happen. You can give us a call at 646-478-3787. Again, 646-478-3787. This is Revenge of the Birds Radio, and I'm Jess Root, your host. We've got Seth and Ben on the line. The offense obviously struggled. However, one thing that has kind of been overlooked, probably because of the reputation over the years, is just how good is the Saints defense. When I had Dave Cariello on the show last week on Thursday, as we previewed our game on the show last week, the one thing that he couldn't say enough about was the change in the defense and how pleased Saints fans are on the defense. And I want to put it out for you guys. If you were to lay blame or give credit for what happened to the Cardinals offensively, how much of it do you believe was simply the Cardinals not being in sync yet, just not having a good game, struggling because it's on the road and a loud stadium? And how much of that is the fact that, hey, the Saints just might be pretty dang good defensively? What do you think about that, Ben?
Well, the Saints defense definitely did what you want your defense to do. They created pressure. They swarmed to the ball. Their corners were pretty much always in position. Their safeties were able to give them help when they needed it. And again, it's tough to beat a defense that can get to a QB with only 4 guys, and they did that consistently all day. But I really think that the Cardinals played right into their hands, with just pass, the 4 and 5 wide sets. And the Cardinals tried to adjust from that game plan. And in the third quarter, they did run it a little bit. On their first, they only had 2 drives, and they did try to run it a little bit, but those drives were killed by incomplete passes, sacks, and penalties. So, and then at that point, you're in the fourth quarter, you've squandered every opportunity, and now you're in a hole, and you have to pass it. And that, again, it just plays right into the defense's hands. And what do you know, the defense or the pass wasn't working earlier. It didn't work at the end of the game either. I don't like to give a lot of credit to Rob Ryan, so it's my opinion more so that the offense dug themselves a hole with the play calling, and they just couldn't get out of it. You look at the Saints D; they played Tampa's offense in week 2. They haven't done much, and obviously the Cardinals struggled mightily against them. So I think you can probably look at the Saints D and say that maybe they're not right where they're going to be at the end of the season right now. Like they are playing well, but if you look at the teams that they've played, they're probably a little bit overrated at the moment, I think, for just the total defensive yards and stats like that.
Well, when you hold Atlanta to 23 points, you could probably put that on at least a feather in your cap, in my opinion. I mean, the Cardinals' head defense was fantastic last year, and that's exactly kind of what they did to Atlanta last year. Seth, what do you think when it comes to how much blame would you put on the Cardinals' offense, and how much credit do you give to the New Orleans defense?
I think it's fairly 50-50. I think you can't really take away a lot of what they did defensively, because they were able to completely shut down the passing game of the Cardinals, which, if you asked anybody, coming into the season, are the Cardinals going to get shut down offensively? Everybody would say, oh no, this offense is completely superior to everything about last year's offense, and through 3 games, really, other than yards wise, it's not. I mean, they're not, they're not throwing as many touchdowns. They're running the ball similarly well through the first 3 games. Now, obviously, we're not to the point where the cliff, everything fell off the cliff yet, but it's just like I said, it's about timing, but it's also the fact that the Saints were able to disrupt the Cardinals' timing. As Ben has stated numerous times during this podcast already, they were winning, up front with just bringing 4 guys. So you have 7 guys in coverage going against a maybe 85% Larry Fitzgerald, and even though 85% of Larry Fitzgerald is better than, what most teams get out of 100% of their wide receivers, it's still not good enough when you have to speed up your process, when you're trying to get rid of the ball early, when you're trying to do things that you really shouldn't be doing. And now it's, like I said earlier, it's to the point where you kind of become concerned about Palmer and the fact that he's getting a little skittish in the pocket already. He's moving, he's got the happy feet. He's moving around more than you want him to, and he's missing a lot of open players. And when he's not missing players, when he's got time and when he makes the correct reads, he doesn't have guys getting open, because if Fitzgerald isn't drawing people, Roberts, Hausler, Floyd, they're not winning one-on-one, and that's a concern, because they were all supposed to be the next guys, and it doesn't seem like they're fulfilling that right now.
Well, if we look at, I'm actually going to jump script a little bit from what I sent you guys earlier, and I'm going to jump to, since we're talking about the offense, about Carson Palmer and kind of his decline. I've got some numbers here over the first 3 weeks that will probably be, you're going to be a little bit concerned, at least a little bit concerned. Percentage, his passes completed, his completion percentage, week 1, 65%, week 2, 56%, week 3, 51%. Yards per attempt. Week 1, 8.18. Week 2, 6.36. And week 3, 5.34. You go to the touchdown interception, 2 touchdowns and a pick week 1, 1 touchdown, 1 pick in week 2, and then 0 touchdowns and a pair of picks in week 3. When you see numbers like that, how much concern does that cause you? Especially now, this was on a more satirical piece on SBNation.com, as they kind of took the negative from every single play. The time of death had declined. It was the interception. In fact, this is the point during the game that I felt basically is where the game was lost. Was that interception, that first interception by Palmer when he has Hausler open and just throws it way past him, and it gets picked off there in the red zone. He continued that drive. They put points on the board. They're still in the game. But going back to this, the satirical piece, it says, this confirms that Carson Palmer is one of the more unstable elements occurring in nature, decaying at a rate that will leave him completing 2 passes for less than a yard and 11 picks by week 9. Now, yes, that's a little, obviously that's extreme. How much are you concerned about the fact that his numbers have been in every part of the passing game have been in decline for the first 3 weeks of the season? Ben, how much are you concerned about that?
It's always a concern when your quarterback is not playing well. I think we've said it just about every week on the podcast. We were saying it back when we signed him. If he can get the ball out quickly and accurately, he can hide some of the line's problems. But right now, he's not helping the line, and they're not helping him. So I don't know where all the fault lies right now. It seems to be pretty solidly on both. We can, like that SB Nation piece said, we can pretty much count on him for at least one boneheaded interception each week. But beyond that, he's played pretty well for the most part, except against New Orleans. I think it kind of looks to me like he's throwing into coverage a little bit too often. I don't know if he's just not reading things right. Maybe he's staring down receivers. Maybe the protection is just not giving him enough time to really read the field. Yeah, I'm kind of worried about it. I think having Hausler back should help a little bit. He played 40 snaps against New Orleans. I think he only had like 4 targets, though, so it's not like they really used him that much. And 2 or 3 of those were disastrous throws by Palmer. So having him in sync with Palmer will help a little bit. Having Fitzgerald getting back to full strength, hopefully that hammy won't be holding him back too much longer. Another thing with the tight ends, they weren't really motioning them either to create the mismatches that you kind of want to see. So you've got one foundation of the Arians offense, which is 2 tight ends. You move them around and you disguise your looks. So the D doesn't know what's coming, and they pretty much threw that out the window this week because Dre and Sperry were barely on the field. So
here's the stats. How many snaps they had? How many plays they ran with 2 tight ends? 8. And they ran. Then they had and all 3 were in the first drive is when they had the 3 tight ends, all 3 of them for running plays, and 2 of those plays I believe were with at least one of those plays with an Nate Potter in the game. But so the staple of the Arians offense wasn't there. 8 plays where he ran in 12 personnel.
And hopefully with House returning to practice full time and everything, they'll get a little bit more creative with their play design, and we will see that the 2 tight end sets and the motion and some of the trickery that we've kind of been expecting all year. And hopefully that will help the offense in general, and that will help Palmer. And when Palmer plays better, everyone plays better. So hopefully, I guess just things will continue to gel.
Seth, how concerned are you about Carson, at least seeing those numbers and that decline every single week in every facet?
The concerning thing to me thus far has actually been how ineffective he's been deep. But this was something that, I actually talked about in the preseason. Way back in July, I talked about how much Palmer struggled in his deep passing game and how, that arm strength wasn't really there anymore like it used to be. He still has the ability to fit the ball into tight windows in that 10 to 19 yard range, but he was struggling to get the ball out past 20 yards and get it out accurately. I have the numbers right here in front of me, and he's only completed 3 passes of 20 yards or more, and that's in 13 attempts this year. That's, like you said earlier, that's a little bit of John Skelton, type numbers right there. 23% completion. He does have the 1 touchdown on one of the deep plays, but he also he has 2 touchdowns on the deep plays, but he also has 1 interception. That wasn't something that I was banking on him improving, but I thought it would improve because the Cardinals just frankly have better wide receivers than what he's had since, the Bengals' heyday back in the day with Chad Johnson when he was still Chad Johnson and T.J. Houshmandzadeh. And so to see that he's struggling that bad deep, and then he's also struggling, and I don't want to say struggling, but he's also not doing as well in the intermediate range as he had in previous seasons. He's 23 of 41, which again isn't bad, but that's only 56% completions, and that's not where he was last year. Last year in that range, he was at 66% completions. Now, obviously, it's very, very early in the year, but he's on pace to throw that intermediate 10 to 19 yard range about 218 times. He only threw that route 114 times last year. So we're talking 100 more throws into that range, and he's dropped, nearly 14 percentage points in that completion percentage. That's something that is actually very concerning to me, because if he's going to be throwing that intermediate routes more often, and he's struggling to complete it, and he's still struggling to complete where he's at in the in that deep range, he's really not being effective in what Arians wants to do, attacking the ball downfield, and then that's not going to open up, other facets of the game, and that's kind of where the teams are at this point. They're saying, well, we know you're not going to throw the ball short to open up the deep routes, so we're going to sit on these deep routes that you like to run, and we're going to make you, find windows, and they're not finding windows at this point.
And I'm thinking, well, actually what seems to be the most concerning part of the whole thing is if you look at the past couple of years, how Kevin Kolb started the season. Kevin Kolb's numbers were not bad. However, they declined, and then he gets hurt. I think I'm not sure we're going to be able to count on. We can't absolutely count on Carson Pollard being healthy for an entire season, but we are going to see we get to see how this, if he bounces back, if he rides it out, if he improves. But we're seeing a lot of similarities in the offense of the past 2 years, or even let's say even the last 3 years. That the post-Warner offense still looks rather post-Warner offense. Just that the potential for being better is there so far. But I think we're going to come around because, and I want to. We've been really down on the Cardinals, and I want to put this in perspective. How many people expected the Cardinals to be any better than 1-2 after 3 games? I don't think anyone. In fact, some people would have expected them to be 0-3. I think the best anyone would have figured would be maybe 2-1, maybe. But I think most people had the Cardinals coming out of this 3-game set. This first 3 games is 1-2. Ben? Did you guys expect anything better out of the Cardinals coming into the year?
I think for me at least, what I expected was the offense to be playing at a higher level. I've actually been really impressed with what Bowles has done defensively, and so when you've seen the improvement, or not even improvement, that's not the right word, but when you see that the defense didn't really lose much in terms of effectiveness, but then the new offense that we've all been waiting to kind of come out of its shell hasn't been unveiled yet. I think that's where my concern is more than anything, because the defenses don't get any worse coming up, and that's what I guess concerned me, is that you had, and this isn't to take anything away from the Saints or the Lions or the Rams, but you had 3 games in which you had secondaries with question marks to kind of get right before you got into the teeth of your league, and I know the Panthers in a week from now don't have a great secondary, but you're coming into the Bucs, the 49ers and the Seahawks, and all those teams have really good secondaries, and you're still struggling to find your rhythm as a passing team. That's what is more concerning than anything else, and that's actually what is more disappointing to me than anything else. And I had them at 1-2 at this point, so I think it's just the lack of steps forward on offense that is concerning to me.
Ben, did you have anything that, aside from how they've looked, did you expect more from the Cardinals, at least record-wise, than what they've done so far? Did you expect them to be better than 1-2?
I mean, I didn't really go through the schedule at the start of the season and kind of pick and choose, point out, well, this is going to be a loss, this is going to be a win. So we lost to the Rams at home. That's, it happens. We can still split with them. It would be better than last year, and that would be fine. We lost to the Saints at home. Everybody's going to lose to the Saints at home, so it hurts to see those games. But for me, I expected the Cardinals to be in games. I knew we were going to lose at least a few, but I expected them to be competitive and to play well. And they've pretty well done that. They had a chance. They had a very good chance to beat the Rams still, even at the very end of the game. And then against New Orleans, they just kind of piddled away at their opportunities, but they hung in there at least for a while. I expected a little more from the offense, like Seth, but the defense, I guess, has probably done a little bit better for us than I was anticipating. So, 1-2 is probably about right. I'm hoping we can beat the Bucs, and then we'll just see where it goes from there.
But truthfully, if they come away with a win on Sunday, they're 2-2. I think probably most considered that at 1-3, that 2-2 is the absolute best case scenario. And you think about the context of, hey, they did that without Darrell Washington, one of their best players on their defense, and you're in a good spot. I mean, 1-3 is probably what most expected. 0-4 would have kind of been reaching disaster area. 1-3, what most people expected. 2-2 would be absolutely fantastic. I think at this point, even before seeing how the games have been played. So we talked about the offense a little bit. The defense has really suffered. I mean, I mentioned at the beginning of the show. And again, you're listening to Revenge of the Birds Radio. This is your host, Jess Roy. We've got Ben and Seth on the line. If you have any comments, any questions, any complaints, anything you'd like to get off your chest regarding the Cardinals, especially specifically coming off the Saints' loss, you give us a call at 646-478-3787. Again, this is Revenge of the Birds Radio. And we're going to talk about now the defensive side of the ball. Particularly, that was a really costly game. The Cardinals lost both starting outside linebackers for this season, both Lorenzo Alexander and Sam Acho. The unfortunate thing is Acho, who was kind of almost invisible, at least from my vantage point. Acho looked almost invisible the first couple of weeks of the season, and then came up with a big. He looked like he was playing with better energy. Maybe the matchup was better. He got the sack. He was in on more plays out in the field, and he breaks his leg. And it's something very similar to Jonathan Cooper's injury. Lorenzo Alexander, after making the tackle, has a foot injury. It's a Liz Franck. He's done for the season. The Cardinals lose Rashad Johnson during the game. He is not done for the season, fortunately. However, he did create he was a big blow in the secondary, and you'll notice that at his departure from the safety position, and he's been around Twitter, it's been on the news, it's been on TV, it's been on the radio, that he lost the tip of his finger on a punt play. He comes off the field, his finger hurts, it's numb, it's bleeding, cuts the glove off, and oh wait, his finger's bleeding, and the tip of his finger's still inside of his glove. He tweeted out a picture of it after the surgery was done, where they had the bone shaved down a little bit so they could heal it up, stitch it up. I posted that picture in an article online on Revenge of the Birds last night, and it's really kind of gruesome. But he hopes to play this Sunday. I don't know if he will, because you got to work on the pain management. You got to be in a position to where infection's not going to be an issue. But losing Johnson, he's really kind of a quietly important player because of his skill set. He plays well in coverage. He's not going to put up huge numbers, but his presence is there. It affects the whole defense. And then the most recent news came out this afternoon when Bruce Arians was on SiriusXM Radio and announced that rookie Alex Okafor, he's now done for the season with a torn biceps injury. So that's 1, 2, 3 outside linebackers that they've lost for the entire season. Now they picked up Vic Soto today. They added Bruce Taylor to the practice squad. They elevated Dante Moak to the active roster, and then they also brought in Kevin Demons from the practice squad to the active roster. I posted this on Twitter. I tweeted this out not too long ago this evening after the news of Okafor. The Cardinals now at that position are going to have a huge season from John Abraham. He's going to get a lot more playing time. I was kind of going to plan on it. We didn't know what we're going to do for the starting, how we're going to look at the rotation. The thing is kind of set in stone now. I was hoping maybe that we could see Okafor worked into the rotational mid. Maybe if he brought in a passing downs, perhaps not bring him as putting in a starter. But it looks like pretty much now you've got John Abraham on one side and Matt Shaughnessy on the other side at outside linebacker, who were, in reality, they were the nickel guys. So Alexander and Acho would come off the field, and Shaughnessy and Abraham would come on in passing downs. Now they're your every down guys. After that, you're going to have Dante Moak. Hopefully he can make an impact. He's got the speed and the potential to be really great off the edge, but he was playing at defensive end in Cincinnati. Now he gets probably his skill set fits the outside linebacker mold better. Then we have, what do we do? I mean, obviously the starters, we're going to see Shaughnessy and Abraham, but what should we do after that? Do we need to make any moves? Do we need to shift anybody around? And in the meantime, how concerned are you guys for the secondary if Johnson has to miss any more time? Obviously, that puts Tyrann Mathieu back at the safety position to start, which moves, and apparently, guess who's passed up Antoine Caisson in the depth chart? That would be Javier Arenas, because it was Javier Arenas in the game on Sunday instead of Caisson in those nickel packages. Let's start with you, Ben. If you had to piece together the defense at this point, what would that rotation look like for you?
Well, I'm okay with Mathieu and Jefferson. I think they've played really well for us. Matthew's been one of our best defenders at this point in the year, so I'm not too worried about if RJ misses a week. I think we'll be okay there. I'm more worried about the outside linebackers. I was really excited to see Okafor. He flashed a little bit in the preseason, I thought, and he was all over the field on special teams against New Orleans. I think for roster moves, they've pretty much done what they're going to do this week. They just kind of band-aid it. We get Darrell Washington back soon. We'll see how RJ is doing. If he's day-to-day or what have you, then that's not too bad. And again, getting Washington back would be huge. I don't know too much about So'oto. I looked around a little bit when I saw we signed him. I think he's a career special teamer, maybe. Hopefully we won't see him on defense too much, I guess. And I know Moke has been here, a couple of weeks, so he should know enough by now to play some. I think he'll probably be in a rotation with Abraham, I'm guessing. And we'll see a lot of Shaughnessy. Obviously, he played a lot in New Orleans with the injuries as they were happening, and he'll continue to play a lot. As far as Abraham playing more, I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing. In the preseason, at least, I noticed he was at his best when he was coming off the bench rather than he was playing long extended drives. So, we'll see how that works out this week, because I don't think they have any choice but to play him a lot, and then maybe they'll kind of work on the rotation a little bit more going forward.
What about you, Seth? How would you think with the rotation? Would you just stick with lots of Shaughnessy and Abraham? Do you work in Moke? Do you move anybody around?
First, on what Ben mentioned about Moke being in here for a couple of weeks and learning the system, one of the reasons he didn't play in Cincinnati was because he could never pick up the system, and he was there for over 2 years, and then they finally just gave up on him after investing a third-round pick. So that was one of the concerns with him. Now, coming to a 3-4 defense, he may be able just to kind of pin his ears back on passing downs and go after the quarterback, which is what his specialty kind of was in college. But, that's a concern. One of the things that I think is underlooked upon at this at the losses of Autro and Alexander, kind of the roles they played in the run defense, they did, both of them do a really good job setting the edge, forcing plays back inside, allowing Shaughnessy and Campbell and Dan Williams when he's in there, and even Darnell Dockett at times, and then the linebackers and Dansby and Brinkley to clean things up. And now it's going to be a finesse guy in Abraham, and he's not really a finesse guy, but he's not as physical as he was, 5, even 6 years ago. And now you have, who knows what on the other side. You're going to line Shaughnessy up, and Shaughnessy's played well against the run, but more from a down lineman position than an standing up position. The guy that I would like to see to get some more reps, especially if and rightfully so, if Dan Williams is still on a bereavement type leave, is Alameda Te'amu, who is just kind of a bull at the point of attack defensively and can do a really good job. The Cardinals are going to be tested the next 4 weeks trying to stop the run now. Like I said, they had really, really good numbers against some not great running teams, and now the script is kind of flipped on what offensive type teams are going to be playing, and it's going to be a lot of running teams, and it's starting this week with Doug Martin and the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. So that's one of the things, and that's one of the things that they'll actually miss if Rashad doesn't play, is his run defense. As much as we talk about Mathieu and Jefferson, and both of them have played very well, they haven't done it as many snaps as Johnson has in the run defense, and so that's kind of a concern. So I mean, you're not going to be able to. I know I've seen some people talk about, it's time to go to a 4-3. Listen, I'm all for that, but it's not a 1 week process. It's something that you start sprinkling in. And they have played some 4-man fronts, but I'm more concerned with what they're going to do with the linebackers, and maybe we'll see more of that kind of big nickel look, but they'll just keep Tony Jefferson and Bell on the field and Matthew or Arenas, however they want to play it, and get some really solid run defensive looks going on, as opposed to playing. I don't really know what Bowles was playing against in New Orleans, because Tony Jefferson only got 6 snaps, so that was kind of odd to see. But I'm rambling at this point. Sorry, but
let me throw some numbers out at you then. Because I think after our discussion last week, I think it made very clear the way they played against Detroit, that we were going to see a lot more of that against New Orleans, and that was not the case. In fact, they were 38 snaps, 38 of the 74 snaps, they were in their base defense with the 3-4, 4-3, and really. And Ben, you actually made the comment online about this. Now, when I chart the plays, I'm looking at how many guys have their hand on the ground, and Shaughnessy, you point out how he's out wide. As I look back on the game, he's almost always lined up like an outside linebacker would be, but it's almost like, since his background is at defensive end, he just prefers to go with his hand on the ground and play outside with his hand on the ground. And so they played 38 snaps in that base defense. They played, let's see how many they had, 30 snaps in nickel, and that big nickel or dime where they had 6 defensive backs on the field, where they ran it 30 some odd times last week against Detroit, 5 times against New Orleans. That was the biggest shock to me, is I thought we were going to see that a whole bunch, and we hardly saw it at all, even after the injuries. We didn't even see one 5-man line. They went with 8 defenders. They went with 5 linemen, 5 down linemen, and 3 linebackers on one play. That ended up being a loss on that play. My take on everything that I see is clearly we have to use Shaughnessy and Abraham. We're going to expect big things out of them. I don't know how much we can expect out of Moak. And that's the thing. Moving to a 4-3 or 3-4, they've been kind of playing, when Shaughnessy's on the field, it's somewhere in between, because he does play down on the ground, but he's out sometimes on the ground, but as a linebacker. I would not be surprised, and we're going to have to weather one more week. Personally, I think what I would do, because we also have some depth at inside linebacker, assuming Kevin Minter gets healthy again, bring back Darrell Washington, and something that we might consider doing, at least for some plays, is moving Carlos Dansby on the outside. He hasn't done it in the 3-4 before, but I know when he first was with Arizona, he played outside as a 4-3 guy. So he has experience on the outside. I think he's smart enough and good enough to do that. I would give him some looks there, and it would also allow you to keep Dansby and Washington on the field more, and allow Brinkley or Minter to come in the game, and that way you've got them both, all 3 of those guys out in the field on some plays. Would you guys consider? I'm just throwing that out there because that's one of the things I thought. Well, Dansby probably could move outside, or we might even see Darrell Washington a little bit on the outside, because he's definitely talented enough to do that. Any thoughts on that?
They used Reggie Walker that way last year a little bit, and I didn't think it really worked out that well. He just didn't have the skill set to really be a pass rusher, and Dansby and Washington are a little bit more prone to that, I think, because they've done it a little bit more throughout their career. I mean, obviously everyone knows how good Washington was last year. Blitzing, of course, blitzing through the A gap is a little bit different than setting an edge and lining up outside in the C gap, but it's a possibility. I think as a stopgap, we'll probably see the inside backers taking snaps there, especially bringing Kenny Demenz up. It's just a little bit more depth at inside linebacker, and he'll probably mostly be playing special teams, if anything. I think that move is all because Minter's probably not going to be playing this week. But as far as long term, I'm not in love with the idea of putting Washington or Dansby at outside linebacker, because having both of them at inside linebacker means that Brinkley isn't playing as much Personally, I think I would probably look to snipe a player off of a practice squad somewhere. I took a look around there. There's some interesting names. There always are, but either that or maybe trade our our fifth running back for someone. Just throwing that out there.
Now, go ahead, say.
Oh, I was just going to say, you and I had actually had a conversation similar to this right before training camp, and kind of the 4-3 under-over type looks that I said I thought would play to this defense's strength once Washington got back. So that might be something to keep an eye on, because it allows I know we don't want to see as much of Brinkley, but he's been really good against the run, and like I said, we're going to see some really dominant running teams coming up here, and that puts Dansby as a strong side linebacker, and that allows Washington to play kind of in that playmaking outside linebacker position that's more like an inside linebacker, and without a pass rusher on the edge, you're not really taking anything away from the 3-4 look. But if they stay in the 3-4, the guy that I would rather kind of put on the edge in specific situations would be Washington, and he's never really done it. But I just think with his athleticism on the edge, you might be able to get some type of pass rush. Obviously, this is a week off right now, but you just look at what they're going to do this week, and they're just going to have to kind of find a way to plug the holes right now. And I'm not as worried about it as I normally would be, because the Tampa Bay offense has just been terrible throwing the ball. So, having Dansby and Brinkley in there another week is going to actually be good to combat this Buccaneers defense or offense. So it's not going to be as bad as everyone is thinking. I think, at least.
I was happy you mentioned Te'amu earlier, Seth, because I thought he played really well versus New Orleans. But I've been happy with how Dan Williams has played for the most part too. He plays the run really well, which kind of creates a conundrum for the team, because now they have two nose tackles, but nose tackle, barely plays like half of the snaps on defense. So do you think maybe it's possible we'll maybe take a page out of Seattle's book and do kind of like an elephant look with just three big linemen and one edge rusher? Or I think that would be a possibility for the scheme? Or so I think that's probably more likely than doing just a 4-3 explicitly,
Yeah, I mean, you look at what they have personnel-wise, and Williams and Te'amu in the middle is, it's going to stop any run game kind of in its tracks. They're not going to be the Ndamukong Su'Nick Fairley type where they're playing upfield, but they're going to be more of the, just eat up blockers and be able to take up space and allow other guys to make plays. The only problem with anything like that is then you're kind of limiting yourself, because as good as Calais Campbell is, he's not super athletic off the edge, rushing the passer. He's more of a interior dominant pass rusher off the edge, if that makes any sense whatsoever. So he's not going to be able to win a lot of things coming off that. And in a league where even though we talked about 5 teams in a row that they're going to face that run the ball really well, you still need to be able to rush the passer at any time, and they don't really have that on their roster, but playing in that elephant type defense, you're even going to handicap yourself more, because Te'amu and Williams are not going to get any type of push in the pass rush whatsoever.
Well, here's an interesting tidbit, and I noticed this, and I think it might have a little bit to do with some of the Saints, at least a little bit. The Saints after the Cardinals cut him, picked up Senio Calamete and put him on the practice squad. Now, 2 days later, after the Saints had played the Cardinals, who longer has a job? Would be Mr. Calamete. I think in part that they looked forward to that, and they'd had a strategic roster spot for at least to get a little bit inside of what the Cardinals were doing offensively, because one of the things that Carson Palmer had said in the offseason is that there's not going to be a lot of tape on what the Cardinals want to do offensively, which gives them at least an advantage initially during the year. Just throwing that out there. There might have been a little bit of strategery going on with the Saints in the first couple of weeks, knowing that, hey, we've got a guy that was running that system in practice, and let's take advantage of that. And now that we're done, well, thanks for having me. You earned a few $1,000s. Enjoy your next stop in life. What do we have to look forward to for the Bucs, actually? So we look at the Bucs for next week. Where do the Cardinals match up well, and where do they not match up quite so well? What do you think, Ben?
Well, I haven't watched the Bucs really, but I looked them over a little bit. I noticed that most of their sacks had come from their inside linebackers. So, you'd think that would help us a little bit. I think take a little of the pressure off of Levi, hopefully. But I've also read that at defensive tackle, Gerald McCoy is playing really, really well, and it looks like Adrian Claiborne is playing well at defensive end too. So, either way, it's going to be a tough matchup. Their defense is playing really, really well overall. I think Mark Barron is doing a pretty good job at safety, although maybe he was struggling in coverage. I'm not really sure, but I'm a bit worried because both offenses are sputtering. So it's it's going to be a defensive struggle, I'm sure. And the Cardinals being 0-2 on the road, that's kind of a worry. The defense getting crushed by injuries, that's kind of a worry. But we'll see how that all shakes out. I think it's a winnable game, but I don't know. 14-10 maybe, something like that.
What do you say, Seth? Where do you like the Cardinals' matchups and don't like their matchups against Tampa?
I like the fact that the Cardinals' strength defensively matches up with what has been the Bucs' strength offensively thus far. The Bucs run the ball extremely well, and the Cardinals defend the run extremely well. So that kind of works out for them in this week. Josh Freeman has I don't know. I mean, if you've watched any of what Freeman's done thus far, it hasn't really been pretty. It's not even really fun to watch. Freeman used to be kind of fun to watch, and now all of a sudden he's just awful. I mean, he's completing 45% of his passes. It's just been really bad, and you watch what they do offensively, and it's a lot of hand the ball off to Doug Martin, hand the ball off to Doug Martin, okay, let's throw it to Vincent Jackson type thing. So this kind of plays into the strength of the Cardinals' defense, and I think, as Ben said, we could see a very low-scoring game. The problem is going to become, can they hold down the Bucs' pass rush enough to do anything, through the air? And, so far we haven't seen them do that outside of game one. And so now all of a sudden the question becomes, can they get anything going? Darrelle Revis is going to be all over Larry Fitzgerald, and it's going to be a great matchup to watch. So it's going to, again, come down to, can Michael Floyd, Andre Roberts, and Rob Hausler make plays in the passing game when they're not getting single coverage, or when, Larry's not necessarily the focal point of a bracket coverage or, a double team. So I think it's going to be a fun game to watch because it's going to have a lot of interesting and integral matchups that'll kind of allow this to play out. And it's kind of strength versus strength at this point. And like Ben said, both offenses are sputtering, but what the offenses do well is kind of playing into what the defenses do well. So it's going to be a nice chess match to watch.
And so we come to the close of our Tuesday night show of Revenge of the Birds Radio. We've talked about kind of the good and the bad that's happened, and as you can tell, there wasn't a whole lot of good that came from the game. However, again, we want to keep that in perspective. 3 games of the season, 1-2. I don't think anyone expected really more of that. They pull out a win here in Tampa. They're 2-2, and I think everyone pretty much would have been happy with that. Any fan will be happy with that, especially without Darrell Washington. Big thanks to you guys, Seth and Ben, for joining us as you do every week. We'll be back on the air. I hope to get one of our Tampa Bay Bucks from Bucs Nation, or one of our guys from BucsNation.com to join us to preview the Buccaneers on Thursday. And then the next time you'll hear from us will be next Tuesday after hopefully an Arizona Cardinals win. On behalf of everyone here at RevengeOfTheBirds.com, I'm Jess Root. You've listened to us. You've got Seth and Ben on the line. Have a good night. Thanks, everyone, for listening. Have a wonderful evening.
Have a good one, guys.
You've been listening to Revenge of the Birds. Keep the conversation going by visiting RevengeOfTheBirds.com. Follow us on Twitter at Revenge of Birds. You can also find us on iTunes at Facebook.com/Revenge of the Birds.